Hi, welcome. So tonight I get to introduce Marta, and I'll start with bios. Heidi Korsavong is the co-owner and director of Marta Los Angeles. She is formerly and occasionally still a designer of objects, furniture, and spaces. Korsavong received a BA in Fine Art from New York University and an MA in Sustainable Interior Environments from the Fashion Institute of Technology. Benjamin Critton is the co-owner and director of Marta Los Angeles. He is formally and occasionally still a designer of type, publications, and printed matter. Critton received a BA in Fine Art and Writing from Hamilton College and an MFA in Graphic Design from the Yale School of Art. Marta is a Los Angeles-based, globally engaged art gallery operated by co-directors Heidi Korsavong and Benjamin Critton. Originally founded as a project space in Echo Park neighborhood of LA in 2019, the gallery's initial mission made space for artists to experiment with the utility of design and for designers to explore the abandonment of function. Since then, the gallery's outlook has expanded to involve practices of all mediums and outlooks, with a focus on works on a human scale that lay bare process, narrative, and materiality. In 2023, the gallery moved to an expanded space in LA's Silver Lake, Los Feliz, where its enlarged footprint can accommodate meaningful, deeper solo presentations, multiple simultaneous exhibitions, and comprehensive group shows. Marta's curatorial publication and editions programs takes an interest in the process of works creation, as well as the narrative of its creators. Marta embraces the intersection of and the transition between disciplines, advocates and for diversity in all pursuits, and promotes broad access to the arts. I've also heard something about a noise band, which I'm kind of curious, and would like to hear more on. Welcome, Marta.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Randy, for the introduction. And thank you to the Cranbrook Ceramics Department for having us. You all are gracious hosts, and we've felt so welcomed on this visit. Thank you to Ian for organizing and initiating this fruitful visit, and Mark for coordinating and organizing all of the tours and studio visits. We've really enjoyed our time here.
So we'll talk about, here we go. We'll talk about four artists. I suppose I should microphone. We'll talk about four artists via their five exhibitions today. And whenever we start out a lot of stuff, we give like a who, what, when, where, why, how. It like really helps us frame a lot of different things, and we even do this for exhibitions. So I wanted to, for those of you who don't know, I wanted to lay down like sort of brass tacks. So it's Marta. It's called Marta. We can talk about her later if you want. It's Heidi and myself. We sometimes call the gallery a gallery for art and design. We try not to designate when we can. Sometimes we call it a gallery for the applied arts, which is a only slightly tongue-in-cheek reference kind of back to a lot of the craft practices that sort of form the foundation of the gallery. The gallery was sort of in a gestational or ideation period from 2017 to 2018. We opened in 2019, and we exist till now. And we're at 3021 Rowena Avenue in Los Angeles, California. And we'll talk about the why and the how afterwards. This is an image of the gallery just about, I don't know, maybe a year and some odd months ago. It was the first show in our new space. It was a presentation by Sarah Burns. It's an old, very much like very sort of LA appropriate. It's an old garage. They used to work on cars here. And so we have this kind of, these great double doors that we open up for things like openings and celebrations and performances. And there is a sort of, I don't know, an openness to the community that we really like. And there's a sort of courtyard in front of it, and things sort of spill out onto there. But just to give you kind of a visual context of where we're at right now. This is up on us on the upstairs sort of portion of the gallery. There's a little space called the mezzanine, which we sometimes do programming for or on behalf of. And it also acts as sort of a place for storage, for lack of a better word, but it's also available works. And so unlike other galleries that often sort of try to hide that stuff away, we like to sort of acknowledge the narrative of work. If a work hasn't been placed yet, we still like to try to find the right home for it. And so for certain collectors and visitors, we invite them up here to see those works. Our first collaboration, really just to kind of go back a little bit, was a font. It was a typeface. When Heidi and I first started hanging out with one another in 2013, she was in the midst of writing her thesis, and she was typesetting things, and I, in a sort of, I don't know, probably like a bit of a romantic gesture, was sort of like, you want a typeface for that? But it ended up being this really kind of fruitful first moment of collaboration, and to this day, it's kind of informed any of the endeavors that we've done. So she typeset her thesis in this typeface that we came to call American Pastoral. And then as we were opening up the gallery, we thought kind of what better thing to revisit. So we tweaked a few vectors here and there. But what I'll call out, if you're curious about the sort of two A's within the mark of the gallery, is that one is kind of for Heidi, is double story A, that's kind of a bit more historical and a bit more proper and a bit more prim, and then this sort of single story kind of school book A, as we call it. And that was kind of the initial kind of gestational period of what would later become Marta. Our first kind of curatorial collaboration, for lack of a better word, was at the 2017 Los Angeles Art Book Fair. And we were invited to, kind of via my graphic design practice, we were invited to take part in a presentation. We were given a corner. They weren't very prescriptive about what we would, or what they would like us to do, and we use it as an opportunity to kind of think about the adjacencies of book culture. We often think about book fairs to people that are coming into them from outside as somewhat opaque things. You're literally judging books by their cover. And so we wanted to sort of talk about the objects that get associated with books, or the way that people can elegantly live alongside their books, of which we have many. And so we had actually been sort of designing or developing a system of bookshelves, but that was secondary to the project, but it is what you see here. Really what we were excited about was looking at bookends. And it ended up being kind of this amazing, there were 23 different artists and designers, some who had designed bookends before, others who did not. But for us, it became the first inkling of something that we might want to continue to do for a while, or something that might sustain our interest moving forward. Because each artist you engage with in a scenario like this, you get to learn a good bit about their practice. It's so much more than kind of what the work is, or what the work ends up being, but you see how they, and I think Heidi might mention this later on, but you see how they send something in the mail. You see how they put together an invoice. You see kind of all these little voyeuristic things into how a practice is operated, and there's so many different stripes to that. And it was really, really satisfying, really, really rewarding. And for each of those kind of bookend pairings, we asked those artists to indicate 5 books that they sort of view as canonical to their practice. And so we sourced vintage copies of those books and kind of sandwiched them in between these bookends as kind of hopefully a means of providing a viewer or visitor access to something close to or canonical for that artist and designer, and hopefully maybe even decode kind of some of the work that they were seeing. The books were available, the bookends were available, and they were also kind of a first flirtation with making democratically scaled works, in addition to the kind of more big ticket items that we would come to host and present. And during that time, we had the opportunity to work with a gentleman called Alex Reed, and this will kind of lead into our first artist and exhibition. Alex was a friend of ours, introduced us by Eric Benjamins, whose work we'll also talk about tonight. And Alex had been kind of having this really interesting moment in his practice. Alex came up at Heath Ceramics, and I think he had recently left there, but he was taking these hikes, and he was collecting rocks and literally kind of hauling them back in his backpack or under his arms, and he would just bring them back and tile them. And it was his kind of means of understanding contour, of playing with different glazes and playing with different grout. And he made these sort of, these tiled rocks was what they are, but this tremendous set of an addition of 5 bookend pairs. And it led us to think about what the first show at a would-be imaginary gallery might be. And it came to be Alex Reed's International Ceramics Friendship Park. Early on in the life of the gallery, we would make a postcard for every single show. It was very sweet. We have a couple up here from Eric Benjamin's show. So you can see some actually kind of primary material. We can or can't talk about the things that kind of fall to the wayside as like gallery operations become more and more real or something like this. Postcards are one of them, hint. But early on, the postcard was actually a really incredible foundational point to talk to Alex, who you see here in his studio in Los Angeles. We had the great benefit of, for the first show that we did at the gallery, of working with a local artist. Alex, beyond being sort of sweet and affable, was close to us, and so we could check in with him quite a lot. It's a real luxury in working with artists who are not as proximitous, poses different kinds of challenges. But Alex was really interested in tiles, and some of the first things that let me backtrack for a second. Some of the first things that Alex and I were talking about at that time was titling and sort of giving oneself a title. He had asked me, sort of when we started the process of doing the show, if I could help him design a business card, and we would trade a vase. He would give me a vase, and I would give him a business card. And I was kind of like, well, what information would you like on it? Is it a website? Is it social media handle? And he was like, I think it's just my name and my number. And I was like, what about, I think it feels like maybe more of a calling card. What about some sort of designation? And he came back to me like a week later with this word, Potter. And he was really, really excited about the kind of the anonymity of the word, how the authorship was brought by him, but that he was sort of carrying the torch for a trade that for many, many hundreds of years was kind of anonymous or workaday or functional. And we'll talk about it later, but Alex was really excited about the sort of the potters of the world uniting, kind of under this title, and almost like glamorizing the word. And he even went so far as to, at some point, I don't know if he tried to give it to us or not, but he was putting his phone number on his vases. This is a right angle vase we'll come back to in a second, but these were forms that he was making quite a lot of at the time. They were kind of a signature form of his. And he was emblazoning for some of them his phone number on the bottom in place of a signature. And this is a sort of quick portrait or snapshot of Alex's, of a sort of corkboard at Alex's studio. And during those first visits, we became kind of very excited about seeing all of Alex's great reference points. So, and I'll come back to the postcard in a second, which you see a sort of 3D print of on the left. But on the right, he had pictures of Shoji Hamada, Maria Martinez, Beatrice Wood, and Peter Volkus hanging, not necessarily as practices he was seeking to emulate, but as figures that had paved the way and that had led the way prior to him. And leave it to us as sort of, at that time, dilettantes in ceramic to be like totally enamored by test tiles. These things that are presumably really rote and boring to you guys are fascinating to other people. They just are. They're so sort of specimen-like. They're so, I don't know, they're so promising with each one. You sort of see any number of pieces that can be made from them. And Alex was really sort of tickled by the fact that we love these test tiles so much. And through conversations, we sort of had been chatting with him about making potentially an affordable edition for the show. And he said, why don't we make the test tiles into that edition? So essentially, you design the postcard for the show about 6 months in advance, and as I'm doing test tiles for the works that will be in the show, I'll essentially kind of apply those glaze tests onto said tiles. And they became a kind of numbered edition and a little bit of a portrait into Alex's studio. So we made space for the cone firing, the number in the edition, the shrinkage of the clay, et cetera, et cetera. And they ended up becoming essentially almost kind of 25% of the show's presentation, due in part to just our fascination with the process. You can see kind of where we were coming from, really sort of dilettante early on, and really kind of, I don't know, I think it comes from a place of real, I don't know, admiration for the process. So you see here those tiles then also sort of shifted. They found their way from the test tiles onto what would become kind of the frontispiece of the show, or the centerpiece of the show, which was the International Ceramics Friendship Park. So this is a picture of the facade. This was at, we've come to call it Little Marta. This was at our very first sort of location. It was 1545 West Sunset Boulevard in Echo Park, kind of down the road from Peter Shire's studio. It was one of the reasons that we kind of felt, I don't know, welcome in the neighborhood or something. There was a kind of arts lineage, which we were really attracted to. And it was a tiny little storefront. It was a storefront from the 1920s, kind of shotgun style. And at some point, when the gallery kind of became a more believable goal, we sort of chopped the space up into mathematical threes. We made the first half the gallery, the second half are kind of offices or desk space, and the third half kind of operations, printer, kitchen, bathroom, et cetera. And it was probably, how many square feet would you say? Yeah. Yeah, it was 15 feet by 15 feet, so really, really small. It was truly, it was ideated as a project space before it was ideated as a commercial gallery. And the luxury of working with Alex early on was that he was a friend as well as a colleague and a collaborator. But you can see the show here and kind of peek into the various parts of it, including these kind of, they became for us kind of really important windows. We would use them for messaging, obviously to attribute the show and who was in it, but also as a means for each show we kind of would make some sort of a gesture. There was poetry on the window for one of them, coordinating with some artworks within. There were kind of mantras or manifestos on there. And for Alex, he really was in a place in his practice where he was looking at architecture and even considering at some point going to architecture school. So taking what he knew from ceramics and grafting it onto this new medium. And he wanted to sort of embrace his not knowing in that. He had a good friend and colleague who was an architect, and she helped him make some renderings and things like that. But other than that, Alex kind of brought his own ideas to it. So I'll read this for you guys. And this was the sort of manifesto that was on the window. International Ceramics Friendship Park is a proposal for an urbanism resulting from an imagined future, one that suggests a built environment in which craftspeople have seized the means of production and representation of their own work and bodies. ICFP is a model city, complete with cooperative housing, pensioners' tower, monument, mausoleum, pool, hedge maze, and communal kiln. The various objects that share this space with the site model are the imagined handiwork of the residents of this notional utopia. In a moment when doing your own thing is commonly idealized as the only reasonable outcome for one's creative interests, even our hobbies, especially our hobbies, are no longer safe from the proverbial hustle of late capitalism. International Ceramics Friendship Park deploys the speculative power of the 20th century urban master plan, built ex nihilo, to draw these conditions to their logical conclusion. And when Alex first delivered this text to us, we had to look up ex nihilo, and it really literally means from nothing. It's a really beautiful Latin phrase, and we sometimes feel like we started with Alex at that moment, and the gallery also sort of was built up from this moment, kind of ex nihilo. In the window, which is also kind of worked like as a window seat / kind of an initial plinth for some of the show's works, we showed some of Alex's traditional ceramics. These were vessels that he was making, kind of extensions of some of the works that he was doing at Heath, meant to contain water, meant to be activated with flowers, florals, greens, etc. Explicitly functional. He never meant for them to be sculptures or unactivated. And so we wanted to kind of show a little bit of where Alex came from. And then the centerpiece of the show, which was the International Ceramics Friendship Park. And I'll go through kind of the 6 stations, as it were. Here's a detail in which you see kind of some of the details. And Alex, I think it's worth noting, was really excited about this not being strictly made of ceramic. He made some pieces out of it, but he was also really excited about 3D printing, which he uses in his practice a lot and is super unafraid of, using kind of traditional model making techniques from architecture, so foam board, laser cutting into mat board and things like this, and building up things which you see on those sort of proscenium stairs there up to the pool, and then using sort of certain things that potters would get, right? So he's using the sponge to make his hedge maze, which we always thought was a really kind of funny thing, and it would later come to kind of emblazon the front of the publication that we would do with Alex for the show. Going through the kind of 6 stations, the first was the Tomb of the Unknown Craftsperson, which was, in our estimation, kind of Alex's true homage to the anonymous potter. This was a proposal for an architecture made entirely from roof tiles, which by Alex's estimation was the sort of most mass-produced piece of pottery the world over, across many cultures. And I can still kind of picture the beauty of this thing. Alex kind of proposed a scenario in which a viewer or a visitor would kind of walk down under the tomb, and that light would filter in through all the little cracks in this roof. And this was a 3D printed component of the thing. The next was the monumental shard pile. Alex's proposal was for a pile of cast-offs, a communal pile of cast-offs, breakage, etc., unwanted pieces that would sort of only grow better and better as different members of the community would kind of add their scrap or their unwanteds or their breakage to it. And it would become this kind of massive communal artwork that only grew. The third, which I don't have a slide for of the tile, this was called the Pensioners Trust, Potter's Pension. Do you remember Potter's Pension Trust Tower? Potter's Pension and Trust Tower. And the Potter's Pension and Trust Tower was Alex's, again, only slightly tongue-in-cheek way of sort of talking about commerce and how to pay for things. And so this was this sort of imaginary residential tower that on 2 of its facades would have this kind of infrastructure of scaffolding that would be sold to advertisers. And Alex imagined specifically catering to advertisers that would make products that potters really needed. So there's the Tylenol for arthritis. There's like respiratory masks. There's things like this, which Alex really got a kick of sort of making a maquette of. The Potter's Pension and Trust Tower was one means of sort of potentially bringing money back into this imaginary utopia via advertising sales. The Jules Agard Memorial Kiln Site, named after Jules Agard, who helped Picasso make a bunch of his ceramics, was an idea for a communal kiln that would be used by all of the members of the community. And of course, the communal kiln would, through its residual heat, heat the therapeutic pool at the Sedatia Aquatic Center, shown here with the big smokestacks. This was one of the pieces of the work that was in fact made with ceramic work. And then lastly, to house everyone, it would be the universal linear housing, which was kind of a Corbusier meets Pompidou kind of proposal for a building that would have kind of all of its infrastructure on the outside. And Alex returned to kind of forms that he had already been working with in his right angle vases to imagine those forms. Other modes of commerce that would bring money to this imaginary utopia. We thought this was really interesting and almost dovetails in a way with performance. Alex sort of assumed the role of these imaginary craftspeople, and he was imagining making a series of artworks that would be kind of products sold to a public. And actually, we were walking by Ian's the other day, and you have the Arco Santi bell out front. He was picturing, I don't know if you guys have been to Arco Santi, but I swear the bells like help that place run, you know? It helps the bottom line. And Alex was picturing a series of sculptures, these he called scholar stones, that would be made by the craftspeople, potentially communally designed by them, and then made available for sale. Obviously, the sort of interesting inflection point is that they were indeed available for sale in the context of a sort of nascent commercial art gallery. You can see some of his 3D printing on the side. These were made of P. Schwartz minimal surfaces. Alex was really, really excited about minimal surfaces, about a kind of economy of scale that sort of dovetails with his learnings from Heath. And you can see him working on them here. And then lastly, in terms of the offerings that were sort of presented as part of the show, but also offered up as these kind of imaginary products for the International Ceramics Friendship Park, were these beautiful puzzles. Alex had been experimenting a lot with tumbling pieces. So he works mostly in molds, but sometimes he hand builds things, and he'd been sort of hand building these kind of more crude puzzles, and had been experimenting with rock tumblers to kind of soften their edges, and ended up sort of creating these kind of puzzle trays, which are meant to be they're meant to be activated. We talked about this, I forget with who earlier today, but meant to be participated in, placed out on a table, and also visitors were invited to do so. So visitors were invited to kind of touch the pieces, engage with them, and there were kind of two sizes, a sort of smaller one in walnut, a larger one in oak. And Alex, in his very generous spirit, sort of used glazed portions and non-glazed portions to kind of help someone solve said puzzles. We did publish a little book in tandem. We do have a couple complimentary copies of it up here. If you're interested, all the folks in the ceramics department will get one. And you get a book, and you get a book. But it was a really interesting, again, early opportunity. We did sort of these zine catalogs for the first 10 shows in the gallery. Or maybe it was like the first, up until essentially the 12th or 13th show, we did 10 total catalogs, so kind of 1 through 10. I was always taught in school that if you number a thing, it'll give you a prompt to make a second one. So this was number 1 in Alex Reed's, or for Alex Reed's International Ceramics Friendship Park. And it included kind of a really interesting, lengthy transcript with Winnie Critton from Heath Ceramics, as well as Rosalie Wild, who is at Heath, and sort of chatting about Alex's transition from a really quite large-scale operation to something kind of more still vertically integrated, but with one auteur, all in-house, all pretty close. Alex, I think to this day, doesn't work with an assistant and sort of feels maybe a little funny about doing so. And here it was paired with sort of more illustrative examples of some of the pieces of the International Ceramics Friendship Park. So the universal linear housing on the left there, and then you can see a kind of exaggerated maquette of the Tomb of the Unknown Craftsperson, which would show kind of an entrance down into the well beneath. And there was a great essay by Peter Zellner called "No Place Like Utopia," and I think that kind of utopic outlook, overly optimistic at times, but still with like a lot of kind of heart and earnestness behind it, is what led us to think that we should continue to do some more shows.
One thing I'll add to the publications that we produced, it was a way for us to kind of make sure that the exhibitions would live on in some ways, that this fixed moment in time, these 6-8 weeks, they're for like the public to visit, but that the research and kind of the learnings and things could continue to spread long after the exhibition closed. And so now we'll take a moment to speak about Los Angeles-based artist Eric Benjamin's practice and his exhibition For Modern Resting from January 2021. The exhibition presented new artworks that converse with forms of design, rhythms of domestic space, and the performative potential of writing. Our working relationship with Eric has taken many forms over the years. We've collaborated together in a number of facets: co-curation, documentation. I think actually you guys met because you typeset his thesis as well. Eric is a self-described disciplinary, unfaithful artist and writer, and these are some examples. He studied performance art at the Museum School in Boston, as well as has a background in photography. And although his output can be quite diverse, a few central themes emerge, optimism, care, and comfort. This is an image of Eric in his studio, and on the left is an image of Eric's feet atop his sculptures, which he called reflexology doormats, which are a central work in the exhibition that we'll look at. This is an installation view with 4 of the reflexology doormats arranged adjacent to one another to create a primary island in the space. The pebbled surface of the work was meant to resemble these reflexology walking paths. Eric first encountered these public paths during a residency in Chengdu, China. Often these paths were large format tiles of stone set into concrete. Pathways were meant to be therapeutic and stimulate healing points on the soles of one's feet. An example of a reflexology foot mat illustrating how certain locations on the foot correspond to different vital organs of the body, and by activating these points, you can release tension and promote relief or increase energy. Upon his return from Chengdu, Eric wanted to find a way to bring back the walking paths in the form of an artwork and possibly a domestically scaled object. Here's an early process image from 2016. Hand-built tiles with clay stones embedded randomly across the surface. At that time, ceramics was a medium that Eric was unfamiliar with. But from these early tests, Eric enlisted the help of Alex Reed, whose practice we were just speaking about, who taught him to make plaster molds for more effective production runs of the reflexology tiles. Here you can see his sketches and notes to design the formats of the tiles that would then become ultimately the 4 iterations distinguished by pattern and color: off-white, blue, celadon, and brown. And these served as the building blocks for the work. The reflexology mats comprised of 15 tiles with unique poems of rest inscribed around the perimeter of the piece. The poems were also written by Eric. He saw them as these kind of highly visual phrases that he hoped would bring a viewer a sense of relaxation. And part of his writing practice engages with his own handwriting, so you can see the handwritten poems there. He used this start to then digitize his handwriting and then apply a vinyl digitization to the surface of these steel trays that would then be patinated so that his hand would be present on the finished piece. This work also speaks about the idea of tiling as a modular system, both in the creation of the reflexology components, but how language could effectively be tiled, how his poetry could be viewed in this way, that by placing 2 or more mats alongside one another, there would be new opportunities created for poems of rest. Visitor participation was encouraged to activate the works, which was a delight, especially during kind of deep COVID times, to welcome visitors for private appointments, to remove their shoes, invite them to traverse these pathways and find respite within the gallery. This is an image of Alex Reed doing kind of a quality control check on the tiles with Eric on the right. And the title of the exhibition is in direct homage to Alexander Gerard's For Modern Living, a show he curated at the Detroit Institute of Arts in 1949. This immersive show assembled a wide range of designers who were embracing modern materials to reimagine objects for the home. Eric has been a lifelong fan of Gerard's practice, primarily for his optimism, his joyful spirit, and the curiosity that he brought to his works, particularly these textiles, which Gerard designed in the 1960s for Herman Miller. They became grounds for realizing long gestating collection of what he calls sun paintings. The sun painting work started from a place of collecting representations of the sun, so photographs, drawings, carvings, paintings, all collected without hierarchical value towards provenance or material. example, a black sprayed circle titled "The Sun" is translated in Eric's fashion to pitch black aerosol void in a manner that's similar to alt text. The font used is a redrawn version of Gerard's alphabet, and to apply these sun paintings, Eric learned to airbrush, and so he used a blue fading to orange to mimic the idea of a sunset, sky meeting earth. 7 of these sun paintings wrap the room, and they're actually mounted quite low, so they create a horizon line of sorts to anchor the floor works below. And I'll just share a few more instances of the sun paintings and their source material. And then this image here kind of speaks to the third element of the exhibition, which are these window seat cushions, a collaboration with artist Finnegan Shannon, whose works seek to address comfort and accessibility primarily in museum and institutional settings. The text is an invitation to slow down, remove one's shoes, and take time with the works. And looking back, it felt really appropriate to have this exhibition when we did. To give context, we installed the works on January 6, 2021. There's hand sanitizer on the window ledge. There was a collective sense of exhaustion and upheaval. So it kind of felt important to offer a small counter in the way of healing and optimism. And in this spirit, we still wanted to find ways to maintain celebration during the opening, so we were able to continue the gallery's cocktail program with takeaway cocktails and hand-drawn suns by the artist. And finally, the Rest is Best bumper sticker, which we have a few for you all, which was produced as a small addition and served as a reminder to the show's main ethos that rest is an inherently vital act.
The third artist we'll talk about is George Sherman. Alex is someone who we continue to collaborate with on a regular basis. Eric, similarly. But their shows were kind of one-off shows. They are engaging in a number of different things. And George, it's worth noting, is an artist that we, after whom we started working with, we've gone on to sort of act as his ostensible representation. And it's a different thing. It's something we could chat about afterwards in a sort of Q&A zone if you want. But it's sort of one of maybe 3 or 4 practices that the gallery is truly like the steward of, or the only steward of, or the main steward of, I should say. George is an amazing Pasadena-based ceramicist. George is 79 years old now. He's born in 1945. This is the postcard for his show. It was one of the last ones we printed in 2022, physical anyways. And you'll see the inversion of the bee and fox, bobcat, bear that dovetailed with the kind of title work of the show, which was a kind of boat work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But George, when he's not actually kind of emblazoning the pieces with language, which are often the self-same titles for the pieces, is thinking about language a lot, thinking about words a lot. He was a typographer for a while. It occurs to me that like there's typography in all of these shows. I'm like feeling a little self-conscious about it, but it's also kind of interesting to see the through lines. So George sometimes puts words on his work and sometimes doesn't. But he's always thinking in language. This is an installation view of the boat work, kind of centered in the space where you previously saw Eric's foot mats. And this is George. George is he's the sweetest. It's very interesting in that George essentially was an instructor for 50 years. He taught ceramics for so long. And it was really interesting to sort of essentially kind of, I don't know, put his, I guess, second solo show out into the world at 77 years old. George, on his sort of it's hard to describe, but George lives kind of up on the mesa in Pasadena, so about 20 minutes from where the gallery is. And he and his wife, Kay, who's also an artist, have sort of carved out a little compound for themselves. And there's a couple little outbuildings, things like that. This is his kind of glaze hut, as he calls it. And on it, on the side of it, next to a sort of pilfered sign from Citizens Bank that now reads Zen, are four, you're only seeing three here, but four kind of tombstones that are kind of homages to some of George's forebears, but also kind of people that he looks back to, sort of maybe as he maybe drifts over here, he kind of always comes back. So the one just off screen is Phil Cornelius, who was an instructor of his. The middle one is Joe Soldate, who we talked about earlier today with Mark, John Mason, and then Peter Volkes. George, as I mentioned, was an instructor for many, many years and taught, sometimes was teaching kind of ceramics 101. He was teaching people how to make their first wheel-thrown cup or mug, teaching people how to make teapots. George, I think George would be remiss that we're showing these to you, but it's an important place to sort of start from. When we go to George's place still, there's work like this all over. It's all quite good. It's quite impressive work. And he's done sort of theme and variation on these pieces for so many years that there's a real kind of richness or sort of like fullness to the catalog of forms that he's made. But he really is excited about showing contemporary works and works that he's working on now. So alongside these three teapots that we showed in a sort of holiday adjacent exhibition in late 2021 were two kind of works that are closer to George's heart and sort of some of his contemporary output. On the left is Cake Tray. You'll see the spiral motif that he comes back to over and over again, this kind of Smithson adjacent form. And then his kind of totem works or smokestacks. And we'll come back to those in a minute as well. And again, there's that like natural plinth of the gallery's kind of window seats coming into play. This was the installation view of George's show, Fox Bobcat Bear. In the window on the left, you'll see Scow there on the window seat. I'll talk about Scow in a minute. And then Cloud 1 up above it. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see Cloud 2 in the background, and Bit and Two Step. So two more pieces from George's kind of totem series. These are three other works from these great works that we've kind of championed from the get-go. We spotted them when we first visited George's kind of compound, and we love them. And they to this day kind of still haven't seen their day in the sun from a collecting standpoint. We've presented them several times, and they don't get the love that we kind of feel they deserve or know they deserve. But we also kind of know where they come from. George grew up on a Navy base. He's a self-described Navy brat. His father was in the Navy. And he was born in San Diego, again, sort of adjacent to kind of some of the maritime history there. And then until he was, I think, 11 or 12, was stationed in Japan with his family. It was his first kind of experience with ceramics. But these works kind of variously refer back to kind of all of these forms that he remembers seeing as a kid, everything from smokestacks of the boats to periscopes and telescopes, to gunship, guns on battleships and whatnot. And they distill kind of a lot of George's thinking back into forms. George also worked on cars for a while. They always, to me, kind of conjure up mufflers or automotive parts and things like this. And we were talking about this a little bit with Tim the other day, is this sort of like, this kind of, George has this amazing means of kind of thinking back to all his now many memories and kind of somehow like distilling them into a form that means kind of many things at once, or can read as many things at once. And adjacent to those, George actually sort of is making these kind of boat forms, or at least he was during the time of Fox Bobcat Bear. These are some of my maybe favorite works still of George's, in that some of the boats he makes are not emblazoned with type. They don't have kind of intrinsic titling, but others are kind of based specifically on either real or imaginary kind of meetings of animals in the wood. They're kind of these, like, I view them as these kind of like epic confrontations or battles. Fox Bobcat Bear being kind of George's hot take, like sort of California mountain hot take on lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. And then the one below, George sort of described as like the two animals that he always hears at night when he's walking his dogs, but never sees. And so there's always, I think, in talking about George's work, there's always kind of this element of kind of what is seen versus what is unseen. He even like kind of draws in the waves on some of these boats as sort of implying what all is underneath this kind of imaginary surface of the water. These are some other George's boat forms. He paints these, or at least the two on the left, you'll see, he paints these with reeds and brushes that he finds right on the property. So these are palm fronds that have fallen down. He'll snip them and he'll use them as paintbrushes. There's a real kind of economy to George's work that dovetails kind of directly with his natural environment, which is very cool to see. And the boats also kind of start to talk about camouflage. George will always kind of go back to nature as a place to think about his work, and he's always really fascinated in sort of natural camouflage of creatures and bugs and critters and reptiles and things like this. These are three works that kind of, to us, distill the movement that you sometimes see in George's sculptures and boat works. And it's Rattlesnake at the top, Cottonmouth, and Gila Monster. George always kind of framed these for us as like the things that you're told to kind of watch out for. There's also tarantula. I don't know if you saw that in the previous slide. Things that you're kind of told to watch out for as a kid, like when you're in the desert. So keep an eye on these things, like the kind of there be dragons kind of thing. Like and I think he also thinks about that a lot as it relates to his childhood and thinking about submarines and things that are seen versus unseen, as mentioned previously. But George got really excited about this moment where he would kind of create undulation underneath these pieces, and he did so with just, again, using really kind of tools at the ready-made. He made plaster molds of some corrugated roofing, and would use that as a kind of a place to build his boat works on top of. And to him, this was not only the kind of the movement of the sea and the movement of all things, but it was also kind of it was the movement of the creatures. So it was the wiggling of the snake. It was the scuttle of the tarantula. So George is always kind of excited about trying to find movement within his pieces, and he sometimes achieves this with the form of the clay, and sometimes achieves this with glaze. I want to talk about scow for a minute because we feel sometimes like one of our jobs or something like it, or responsibilities maybe, is to sort of like find these missing links in artists' work, especially artists that we're engaging with who have been making work for some time, is sort of finding which moment in that artist's output sort of bridges the gap between two disparate bodies of work. And scow was, in our estimation, that piece, and it sort of bridges George's boat works as well, or kind of leads into his wall works, and vice versa. So you see George here kind of building one of the kind of houses, as he would talk about, on top of scow. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention about scow was that the scow is the name of a kind of really unexceptional boat. It's like a flat-bottomed boat. It's often used as kind of like, from my understanding, kind of like a tugging barge, sometimes for carting things in the port. And I think this piece, George was always like, he kind of intimated it was almost like a little bit of a self-portrait. He's like, I'm just moving the things from here to there, and I'm like doing the work, and I'm kind of moving through it. And he has this sort of couple little outbuildings on his property, and he'll haul big, huge bodies of clay over to the kiln, and he'll bring that to the glaze thing. He kind of does this thing, and now that he's retired from teaching, he kind of does it every day. He treats it pretty much like a job of sorts, and I think he kind of always saw himself in the scow. So it feels like a really kind of canonical piece to us. Again, him building it, and the scow was kind of his bridge from surface works or plinth works, if you will, to wall works, and vice versa. And this was one of the pieces, when we first saw George's work, some of his wall works were the things that really sort of stopped us in our tracks, as things that, like, some of George's best work kind of mean a lot of things at once. They say a lot of things at once. They connote a lot of things at once. There's a bunch of different access points to them beyond their, in our kind of point of view, beauty. But George was making these functional tray works for quite some time, and laying them flat sort of on surfaces. And those trays, via the creation of scow, kind of at some point got turned over and started to get hung on the wall. So George would make kind of painterly inscriptions on the back of them. You'll see some of the actual kind of marks where he's just kind of like scratching into the clay with the sticks or fingers, things like this. But it's often, the back of the trays was where George would sign his works. And Cloudworks became kind of a way for George to get work up on the wall without kind of the addition of wire or something like this, some sort of visible thing. He was really excited about this kind of apparently heavy thing sort of floating there on the white wall. The clouds in our minds they're a couple different things. I mean, we always kind of see in them emulations of that camouflage that George has always been excited about. This was a way for him to really start playing with his glaze and sort of mixing them. He'll sometimes use like little bamboo reeds or something like this to kind of blow glaze across the piece to get these kind of things that almost look like airbrushed or something like this. To us, they're also, I mean, it occurred to me when we were flying in from California, they're also kind of, they're kind of the land brought up also, which is it's literally like just a really kind of candid physical thing where George is taking his tray works and he's putting them up on the wall, but it's also kind of the land brought up. And so we view them as kind of clouds and landscapes at the same time. And they often kind of read to me sometimes as sort of plots of land or agricultural fields or something like this. So they do a lot of things at once, and they're works that we really love of George's. This is Cloud 2, so this kind of more long linear thing with little bits of blue kind of going back to that dazzle camouflage. Did we talk about dazzle camouflage? George was excited about dazzle specifically, which was this kind of really gestural, unlikely kind of mode of camouflage used during World War II. That looks very graphic and sort of like it wouldn't actually work and somehow weirdly did. And this is an installation view with kind of a conglomeration of these multiple works. And you'll see we wanted to share a little bit of kind of George's background. So this is the sort of main studio in the background there. This is George putting some clay together. And you can see the sort of peaks of the mountain in the background. So those are the Sierra Madres. And the Angeles National Forest just beyond him. And George lives in this place called the wildland-urban interface. So it's really kind of where suburbia butts up against the land. And you can see one of George's trays on the side. When George is kind of in between bodies of work or when he's stuck, he'll make trays. The trays are these really kind of honest places for George to work out kind of more representational ideas. And he'll often just paint species that he sees around. I use paint loosely, but make forms of species that he sees around. So this is a kind of traditional paddle cactus, maybe prickly pear cactus. This one's called Espinas peligrosas, which just means dangerous spines. So kind of going back to that, like watch out for the tarantula, the rattlesnake, the blank. And this one's Western Cloud, which kind of speaks directly to the mountains. And maybe is the most kind of landscapey of them. And here you can see Western Cloud in George's studio kind of set against some of his totem works. The kind of plurality of works that you see here is kind of directly related to George's ceramic practice of always making kind of two of something. He'll just, it's what he's learned to do over years of kind of what was presumably at some point kind of heartbreak as it relates to breakage. We always are so enamored and impressed by you ceramicists. So I feel like you all have like a very level head when it comes to life because you've dealt with breakage before. But George was just kind of get into the habit of making of two of something. But of course, every now and again would sort of either be unhappy with a work or would have that breakage and would leave the piece to sort of rest in the shard pile, which sort of dovetails back to, this is the first time that we kind of saw something like Alex's imaginary monumental shard pile. And that kind of doubling or working on two things at once sort of led specifically to the second solo show we did with George. And we also wanted to include one show that takes place in the new space, just so you guys can see sort of how different it is to program a really sort of small space versus one that has a little bit more square footage to it. But we wanted to share first this work of George's called Columbine, named after the flower. This was a photograph from our kind of first set of studio visits with George, which you saw kind of previously. And this was a piece that he was working on then that would kind of later come to find its way into the show 2 years later. So I think also something to think about is the kind of rhythm of presentation, thinking about sort of what gets its due when. You know, it's every artist will always want to show what they've most recently made. And sometimes there are gems in there, so don't throw stuff out, and also be open to showing stuff that's not necessarily as fresh in your mind, because it might be fresh to other audience members. Anyways, this is the finished Columbine, and it was honestly another thing we'll talk about as it relates to this presentation is scale. It was honestly one of the smaller pieces in this show. So George, as he's sort of leaned into this new practice, or a new version of his practice that kind of started post-retirement in 2019, he's really grown up. He's or in terms of scale, and he's working kind of bigger and bigger and bigger. And again, always, or not always, but mostly in these doubles and these duels. What was I going to say? George always works in sections, which we'll talk about later. But he does not let sort of kiln size limit his aspirations, which is always really interesting to see. And so you see the snake works have kind of, snake works / boat works have kind of, they've grown and they've shifted. They too have kind of changed plane. They used to be on these plinth forms or hung onto a wall. Now they've gone vertical. They've gone squiggly in different ways. The smokestacks or the sort of totem forms that you see have sort of worked their way back onto the boats in some instances. The one on the left is called Poison Snake, as it says. The one on the right is called Azure Bat. And George starts to really play with kind of much bigger forms. The piece in the center is called Sierra Madre Coil, and this is our dog for scale. And you can see this is probably 5 or 6 feet across, and you can see the little cuts in the pieces. So the pieces are hollow. He hand builds them. There's a sort of slab down on the bottom, and George is now kind of, for this piece anyways, like he's making mountains. It's so literal in some ways, and it's so rewardingly literal to me and to us. And then he's also sort of, leaning into different vantage points for the work, going back to kind of this Smithson sort of spiral jetty. The works kind of almost get to the scale of land art in some instances. And this show, we were hesitant to sort of show this many works in this space. If you guys have ever been to like a Dia Beacon or something like this, like we kind of wanted to just show like one big sculpture in the center of the space. It's not fiscally viable for us as it relates to sales and things like this, which we can also talk about. Because George is also sort of working as a young artist despite his age. In terms of the prices for his work and things like that, we want to sort of introduce him to the market and the market to him. But you can see kind of some of the scale of these works. And the two in the foreground I'll point out are called Splash Breathe 1 and Splash Breathe 2. So this is kind of an ongoing, this is Splash Breathe 1, his ongoing sort of endeavor of always making two of a thing. And sometimes he'll just choose whichever one he likes more, and sometimes they become like diptychs. So it's become an interesting way for him to work, either as a means of editing or as a means of sort of making pairs and making rhymes. And this is an installation view of the show that also kind of shows some of the continued boat works. So the Gila Monster has been enlarged there in the background. And he's also engaging with kind of elongated boat forms. So he's still working these themes that he can always kind of come back to, but he's iterating on them so expressively and so sort of generously that they keep on giving back to him by our estimation. This was the sequel to Rattlesnake. It's called Rattlesnakes, but it's called The Kiss, kind of after Rodin. So you have two sort of boat forms running into one another. And this was a sort of, we show this work because this one has actually led, kind of paved the way for some of the work that George has made since the closing of this show in February or so of this year, and what we'll work to probably for a solo show with him again in 2026, but we'll also do a couple little presentations with him over the course of this year And so some of that has to do with George works at a pace unlike most artists. George is working every day, and his output is prolific. But when we see certain things of his that have resonated with an audience and that similarly resonate with us, we're like, George, that. And so George has sort of taken this wall work. Remind me the name of this one? Yeah, so shore vertical aspect. So he's literally even starting to title things when they move from one position to another. He's taken this and sort of running with it for works that you'll hopefully see in the next year or so. And then we just wanted to give kind of an overhead of the show to show the kind of monumentality of it, and to also give a sense of the space. This makes me so self-conscious of our floors, our old like auto body floors. You can see like little oil spills and stuff. But a good kind of overview of the space from looking down from the mezzanine. That wraps up George's.
So the final artist practice that we'll speak about is Isabel Rower. Isabel is a recent graduate of the RISD 3D program, and we came to learn about her practice through her experimental processes and materials. Our working relationship with Isabel has grown really gradually through the years. She's participated in a few of our New York-based group exhibitions, and we found that on occasion that the group show provides a good testing ground for a relationship to grow. You learn about an artist's methodologies, communication styles, proclivities, and as Benjamin was saying earlier, can be quite voyeuristic into how someone does things. Isabel first participated in Under Over East. It was a typology group show of teepee holders by 23 New York-based artists and designers, and she was invited by guest curator Emmanuel Alunkwa. And so the challenge with this exhibition was to find a space in which the works could be visited without having an attendant present. Information about the exhibition would need to be clear and concise and legible to any passerby. And for this exhibition, our partners, Plant Paper, a sustainable toilet paper company, found a storefront in Chinatown, New York, and we collectively decided to build out the space in a way so that the exhibition could be viewed from the window at all hours of the day, unmanned and unsupervised. And for the show, Isabel created what she called Venus flower baskets. It was a decorative ledge for the paper roll to sit on top of. The work was made by casting polyurethane bits into porcelain slip. And in the firing process, the polyurethane material is burned out, leaving a crystalline sponge-like structure. An end result that was so delicate and so precarious as to question the material relationship to the would-be porcelain toilet it would be mounted adjacent to. And last year, we had another opportunity to collaborate with Isabel on the occasion of Make Do, a group exhibition of historic and contemporary ad hoc chairs. Our exhibition partner, Avi Kovacevic, who runs an online auction house called Catalog Sale, had been amassing what he called a collection of chairs that he called improvised chair typologies made out of a spontaneous necessity. So an example of that would be a chair assembled out of tires by employees at an auto body shop as a means of finding comfort during a work break. And the exhibition took place in a standalone former medical imaging facility in Chinatown in New York. And to date, it was probably the most physically ambitious and unlikely site that we've staged an exhibition in. For this exhibition, we gave the artists a simple brief: make a chair in 3 days. Day 1, identify and gather materials. Day 2, design and plan. And day 3, craft and assemble. The idea was that the contemporary chairs should capture some of that experimental energy of their historic counterparts, and a reminder that limitations can often provide a deep well of inspiration. Isabel's chair was a standout in the group, and serendipitously also resembled one of the vintage chairs that happened to be composed out of cardboard. She was excited by this brief. It was a new experimental process for her, and to date it was the largest piece that she had made. Isabel responded to the brief by using the surplus cardboard from her clay orders. She covered the chair with slabs of red stoneware clay that she assembled with a mallet. And then this is the completed work after firing. The response to the work was strong, and the work had this effect of being materially confusing. People would ask if it was made of leather or of metal, but it also had this trompe-l'oeil effect of resembling the cardboard, the material that had given it form. And Isabel had found the process of making this chair rewarding, and we spoke about ways to continue working together again. And a few months later, she sent us these images, these small maquettes and tests that she had done. The box chair had grown into a full suite of sculptural furniture. The chairs begat tables and stools and lighting work. She kind of began to imagine this whole environment for the works to exist. So we decided to present these box works at NADA New York earlier this year, which it's a contemporary art fair. And we placed them in dialogue with Korean painter Myung-Ae Lee, whose shaped canvas paintings share a strong formal relationship to Isabel's work. And this was also a moment to speak about their biographies and present compelling works from multi-generational art practices. Isabel comes from a long line of artists, and Myung-Ae is the mother of another artist designer that we work with in the galleries program. And each of these instances, you can see how each generation is influencing the other. And so this is some of the presentation of works. And so because the gallery often shows work in this intersectional space, it can be quite happily confusing at fairs when visitors see us or the artists sitting on the works, or when they're invited to touch and interact with the works. And from here, more fruitful iterations of the box works continued. Isabel returned to painting and still life. You can see all these kind of Morandi-esque works on the wall, and she began constructing more functional box works in a smaller scale to kind of complement the larger furniture works. You can see her iterating, and some of the works take on an even more box-like form. These are some of the functional pitchers and teapots. We exhibited these works at the gallery, which gave us a nice opportunity for our Los Angeles-based collectors and community to see the works, to interact with the works, and kind of begin speaking with them about her practice and upcoming solo exhibition at the gallery in 2025. And so this is an instance where a single chair constructed in response to a brief became grounding for new bodies of work, multiple iterations, and conversations about the future. Thank you.